All right, thanks. Hello, everyone. Welcome to SIG Auth for January 23rd. We have a packed agenda because thanks to the Zoom outage, we canceled last week's and we've crammed it into this week's agenda. All right, so let's get to it. Oh wait, I am not sharing my screen. There we go. All right, so first topic. Jordan opened a PR to finally follow up with our promise to have tech leads in SIG Auth. And based on the methodology in our charter, we have seated the initial 3 tech leads as Jordan, David, and Mike Denise. So congrats to you all, and thanks for stepping into that role. Any questions, comments, or concerns about this? Otherwise, we'll probably merge it later today. All right, of course, feel free to reach out to the SIG chairs or leads directly if you have concerns you don't want to discuss in the public forum. All right, let's move on to the demo. Rita, are you on the call?
Hey, yeah.
All right, take it away.
Hey, everyone. All right, let me share my screen. I think you have to unshare first, maybe? Yes. All right, cool. Do you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So this solution is mainly to address, as a developer, if I already have a solution for all my application secrets, and would like Kubernetes to be able to use the same source of truth for those secrets, how would I do that? And let's say you also want to avoid manually creating secrets and updating certificates to your Kubernetes cluster. How would you do that? So this demo is to introduce the Secret Store CSI driver, and this is actually a sibling of this Flex Volume, which pretty much does the same thing, but it's a predecessor of the CSI driver, and we decided to write a CSI driver since it's the next gen device driver. So quickly, I would like to show a demo of what the end user experience is. So now I have a cluster with 2 agent nodes, and so basically we have a Helm chart specifically created for this, and I've already pre-installed the Helm chart. And what the user will have to do is basically deploy these few things. So first, they will have to create a PVC that looks something, like this. I need to create the PV first. So as you can see, this was built to support multiple providers, and currently I'm demonstrating the Azure Key Vault provider. And what it does is you specify the provider name, whether you want to use pod identity or not, and then you specify the Key Vault name as well as the objects that you actually want to mount. And as you can see, we support multiple objects. So once all this is provided, and then you have to deploy a PVC, a static PVC, then you will have to basically deploy the pod that actually talks to the PVC. And then once all this is done, then you would basically do something like this. And then that's then the secret that is stored in your key vault will basically be mounted to the pod as a volume. And then you can actually read the value out and then expose it as an environment variable or however your application needs to use it. So yeah, so that's pretty much the demo. And then as far as like, first maybe questions. Does anyone have any questions?
I had one question. How much of this depends on like the global PV aspect of it versus could use the local CSI driver support that we had pushed SIG storage to go implement?
Are you referring to like dynamically creating the PVs?
No. So when we went around the first round of this discussion, we asked SIG storage to make sure that local CSI drivers that don't require you to hook into the global attach PV mechanism would be functional. How much of the design that you have depends on PVs, like in terms of having some global object that's shared across nodes versus could be implemented or should be implemented if there was a local CSI provider?
Okay, I think you're referring to the actual driver, right? Like where does it actually live, right?
Right, yeah. Is there something about this design that you think is fundamentally needs a global, cluster scoped resource like PV versus something that would run on the nodes and just be an external integration without needing the driver to be on the cluster?
Mm-hmm. So currently the solution is the driver is deployed on every single node. And the reason for that is when the pod is deployed, it basically needs to attach like a local volume. So it's kind of the same way as like Kubernetes secrets work, like where you would have to mount the content as if it's a volume, but it's on the node itself. It sees it as a local file system.
Yeah, I could take a follow-up to talk more with you about what we wanted CSI to enable. Just you probably need to talk more about the use case. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what it looks like on the node itself. So yeah, and that's the same way it works for the flex volume too. We'd love to learn more about like if we weren't doing it this way, what would the alternative be?
Yeah, flex volume in particular had the ability to be specified inline in a pod rather than kind of first creating a persistent volume and then a persistent volume claim and then having the pod reference that. So you could specify a flex volume driver and the parameters for it inline in a pod, which was nice for sort of these on-demand. You kind of want naming the keys and secrets that you pull down from the vault to be inline. It might be cleaner. And so I threw a link to the issue Clayton opened, asking for CSI to support something similar into the.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. I would love to not have to create like PVs and PVCs. But yeah, to your point, for the flex volume, this is what it looks like. So from an end user perspective, the flex volume one is actually much easier because to your point, you just define it in your pod YAML and it just works. Whereas for the CSI driver, you will have to, like someone will have to go and create the PVs and PVCs for anybody who wants to use the secret.
Yeah, so I'd recommend you taking a look at that issue if you want to provide feedback.
Sure.
Since you did both and
Yeah.
had experience with both, feedback from someone who did that would be super useful.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Any other comments, concerns? Oh, and I also want to just add that, like, I think, am I seeing this right? Hold on. Is Mishra on the call?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think, you want to talk about the HashiCorp one?
Yeah, so I think I've been working with Rita. Sorry, by the way, my name is Mishra. I'm a developer advocate at HashiCorp. I've been working with Rita on kind of an initial version for supporting HashiCorp Vault as basically exposing the key value store into the pod as well, very similar to what she has for Azure. Currently, like we're just like doing some initial kind of rounds of understanding like what exactly needs to be done to make sure like we do it properly in terms of the chicken and egg problem. That's like, how do you auth against wall, which we already have a Kubernetes kind of auth mechanism, but is that appropriate for this kind of project and so on? So it's still kind of initial, kind of groundwork there, sharing some notes with Rita, and then hopefully we have an initial version which supports just the key value store that bot has. We won't extend it initially, won't extend it to other stuff like database secrets and so on, kind of keep it scoped and see what people say. And then as this project evolves and as our initial kind of POC evolves, we'll hopefully have something to demo in this session.
Thank you. Are there other questions, concerns?
My meta question is just in general, what are the ways that we want to support for secrets going forward? Because I think one thing that Kubernetes does poorly is provide a recommended path for users. And for providing them with lots of different options, that's great, but I think that just confuses especially a lot of our new users. So is this something that we want to officially support and recommend, versus some of the other things that we already have for secrets?
All right, I know the use of the volume mechanisms for things like this was discussed a lot in the container identity work group. So far, it seems to be a fairly reasonable path. I think we would like to see some of those things like the inline specifications, if not implemented, at least planned and agreed on before we sort of pointed to this as the way forward. But I think this approach kind of strikes a reasonable balance between flexibility on the node side and allowing a wide variety of integrations, but also kind of keeping it expressible in a way that matches the way people are used to consuming volumes and secrets. So I think I would like to see the roadmap be a little clearer, but as a direction, it seems reasonable to me.
And also, my questions for the group would be, some of the comments that came back were, how does this work with like environment variables? What's our like recommendation, right? Like if someone wants to use that, and how would this be actually? How does it actually work with environment variables? So that's one question. The second one would be like, how does someone update the secrets? So once a volume is mounted, it no longer, you can't change it unless you have like a sidecar that watches it and maybe trigger some update or something. So those are things that came out of users. So Flex Volume has been out there, for a few months now. So we got a few discussion issues out there. So those two are the big ones. And
I know for environment variables in particular, even the existing ability to take Kubernetes secret key values and put them into environment variables is not really the most recommended thing. Environment variables show up in the container manifests that are passed to CRI, and so they tend to get logged. They tend to get echoed. They're a lot easier to extract from inside the container. And so insertion as files is definitely recommended. Also, what you pointed out as far as updating, even for Kubernetes secrets, when you mount them as environment variables, they don't update live. But when they're mounted as files, they have the ability to be updated.
Yeah. So I think those are the, sort of the recommended path for people. Even if we're saying no, we have to give them hey, here's what you should be doing, right? And just, if you guys want to chime into this issue, would be awesome, considering it's more coming from the community, right? But here, as you can see, like a lot of people are asking mainly because that's sort of like the pattern, like the 12-factor application pattern. It's always using environment variable. And also a lot of the deployments that we have today, like say, Istio or like anything that's pretty major that we use today, they all use environment variables. So that's sort of like the blocker, if you will, for a lot of people when they looked at this, because they didn't want to like go change how existing things work, right? And that's why the question, like, how would I be able to use this solution, but also continue to utilize the existing applications? I do utilize environment variable.
Okay.
Yeah, we've generally recommended that if someone wants to do that, they wrap their container process, as you noted down there. And I don't think that's unreasonable.
Yeah.
I think, there was someone discussed this a few years ago about an environment variable projection that would project from inside the container image or the file system. And it was such a weird use case that at the time we kind of said no. And I don't know that we would go back to it. Like reading from the file system to put into the environment on container startup gets into a really weird world. So I'd say it seems unlikely that we would ever add that as an official plugin to Kubernetes, at which point you're looking at either something at a lower level, which isn't going to be consistent across platforms. So it may kind of be, this is the best that it could ever be. I know that there was some discussion like sidecars and making it easier for people to wrap processes that has kind of languished. Like this kind of shell script wrapping. There's other kinds of wrapping that people are doing today to reload config variables. Certainly most microservices frameworks are using something like Procman or some of those user level process managers that actually do some of this. So there is something that could be said for the people who are using microservices and have a pattern. They should institute a pattern that handles this outside of the apps anyway. Like Kubernetes was not designed necessarily for the pod spec to solve all microservices use cases.
If you want to throw links to those issues into the SIG Auth agenda, just so people can chase them and kind of weigh in if they want.
Yeah, for sure. I'll do that after this. Okay, so in terms of next steps, what should we look at? And you did mention look at how it's implemented, the spec, and so forth.
Yeah, I think a report of your experience developing this and some of the friction points or ways that you would like to see it become easier. I think getting involved in the inline CSI work would probably be a good next step. Okay.
So just to clarify, given that there is the Flex volume implementation and the CSI driver, are we leaning one toward over the other? Or
CSI is the V2. There are ways it doesn't have parity with Flex, but
okay.
All the work that I'm aware of is going into the CSI driver work area.
Okay, so we should look at CSI V2 then. Okay. Anything else for next step?
Versus Flex. Are we really thinking it's a V2 or should we prioritize CSI?
CSI is like V2 of Flex drivers. Flex drivers were kind of a proof of concept prototype that actually was usable, and so it's still there, but there's no active development on it that I'm aware of.
Understood, but I mean specifically for this functionality, it would make more sense then to have it work with CSI.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah, that's good confirmation. Because we're kind of supporting both at the moment, so it would be nice to consolidate efforts. Okay. And then as far as providers, I think in the future we will have Azure Key Vault provider and HashiCorp Vault provider. Are there other providers that you think would be a good idea to be added to the list?
I think we should aim for parity with both AWS and GCP secret solutions.
Okay. So are there people that you know that I should talk to, or?
For GCP, it's probably via me.
Okay.
For AWS,
This is Maya, right?
Yeah, this is Maya.
Cool.
For
Okay.
AWS, I see a few people on the call, but I'm not sure who the best point of contact is.
Yeah, I'd say just reach out to SIG AWS in general.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Anything else? Cool. Well, thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Jordan, I think you have the next item on the agenda. Anything you wanted to say about the deny escalating exec?
Nope.
All right, it's there. We're deprecating it. Take a
The
look at
reasons
that.
are in the poll. If you agree or disagree, comment in the poll. And this is just a updating doc, letting people know, hey, you probably don't want to use this, and here's why.
Yep, thanks. Along similar lines, I'll just call out this deprecating allow privileged. This is something we're doing in the kubelet side, and in doing so, realize that actually we have this flag on the API server as well. Allow privileged is insufficient from a security perspective, disallowing that, because there's lots of other privilege escalations that it doesn't prevent. So we want to deprecate it, but I think with the policy, we'll probably mark it as deprecated in 114, and it'll go away in, I don't know, 117 maybe?
Year 2032.
Yeah. Can we move the discussion of the 114 requirements and timeline down to right before we talk about the other 114 stuff?
Sure, yeah. Sounds good to me.
I do want to make sure we have time for it. But let's see if we can get through the other two items first. Deep DeBroy or Jeremy or Jean, do you want to take it away? Are any of you on the call?
I do not see them. I can give a 1-minute summary of this if you want, and we can.
Yeah, sure. Then we can maybe postpone the further discussion.
Yeah. So this is looking for a way to control what group managed service account Windows processes are started with. So this is running in a Windows domain, and the Windows container runtime has support for telling it what service account to start a process as. The CRI, the container runtime interface, has a way to plumb this information through, but there's nothing in the API or the kubelet that allows plumbing this through. And so this is a proposal to, as a first step, build an extension that lets you kind of have these credential specs, which is this JSON blob that describes your service account, in a custom resource, and then have a webhook admission plugin that takes a symbolic name. You say, I want to run as the group managed service account foo, and the admission plugin says, oh, well, foo corresponds to this blob, which is the credential spec. And then I will do an authorization check to make sure that this pod's service account is allowed to use the GMSA foo. And then those two bits of information will plumb through in annotations, at least for the initial proof of concept. Plumb through as an annotation, which gets carried through the CRI, and then the Windows CRI would have the option to honor that. And so this is kind of proving out, letting you take advantage of existing auth infrastructure in your Windows domain. So the first step is this proposal to do it as an out-of-tree extension, and then we're trying to understand or plan out how operating system specific things could or would be added into the pod spec. Some of those things are already in the container runtime interface, but we're trying to kind of understand, like we have Linux specific things already, like UID and group ID, and just trying to have an eye towards how would that be shaped as we have different stanzas that only apply to a particular operating system. So I think there's a pretty reasonable first step for proof of concept, and then some open questions for what it would look like kind of being brought into a more official API once it's proved out.
All right, thanks for that summary. Let's see, next up we have authentication of webhooks. Patrick, do you want to talk about your KEP?
Yeah, sure. So we've got this KEP here. It's basically to provide a way of webhooks outgoing from the API server, provide a way of authenticating them. Specifically, I did the dynamic auditing work. So if you have something, running on a cluster, you're sending audit events out to, a proxy. How does that proxy now authenticate the API server to make sure there aren't, false events getting thrown into the stream or something like that? So Jordan did a little talk on this at the last KubeCon. He laid out the space pretty well, and I think that's kind of in the comments here if anyone wants to look at it there. But there are a couple challenges kind of faced as you try and do this. So this proposal is just intended for kind of cluster-aware webhooks, and the idea is we would provide a mechanism, expose it through the API that would basically say, add a token to each request as it's outgoing, and then that token can be checked back through the API server using the Auth Token Api. So it's just kind of a simple way of doing it. Obviously, kind of the bigger one here at some point would be how do we do secret-based authentication and actually be able to provide secrets. We ran into issue of the server aggregates running in different namespaces. How do you differentiate across them? How do you share a secret across namespaces? How do you provide authorization to do that? So there are a lot of issues kind of running into that. We kind of did our analysis of what was necessary in this space. It seemed like most of what we saw people doing were cluster-aware webhooks, and this seemed like a really simple way of doing that. So we'd like to try and squeeze this into 114 if we can. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts. We have a couple of API machinery people on board today as well. Curious if you have any thoughts on this.
So how do you see this problem space as being different from the admission webhook problem space, where we already have a way to authenticate requests and potentially distinguish them between different aggregated API servers?
How are you guys doing that? I didn't see any way of doing that today.
It's possible to configure a file. We used a kubeconfig format, but it is possible to configure a file where you indicate that for these particular outbound connections on a set of pattern matched hosts, you will secure it either with a token or with a client cert that you configure.
But that's not exposed through the API?
The file that you use to indicate what should be submitted is actually done as a file on disk, so you can use a secret mounted in if you wish to.
Okay.
So it's not reread. So
it's not reread. I mean, like, I could certainly see room for improvement. I could see the idea of getting a particular token with the right audience would be valuable, but that kind of mechanism, why is this one different?
I guess I didn't see that in the Auth API. I'd kind of looked through to see if you guys had a means of doing that. I just assumed that because you're checking off, you maybe weren't authenticating the caller. I didn't see that anywhere in the API, so I must have overlooked that.
yeah, so it's not in the auth webhooks. It is in the admission webhooks, though.
Maybe I need to dip into that a little bit. Yeah, it's.
So I think there are usability problems with the existing mechanism. It was kind of the minimum thing that could work. I think separating the authentication, the description of how you authenticate from a webhook to a webhook from the actual registration of the webhook is not great. It makes it really hard to look at a configuration and understand what is going on. So you say, I've got this webhook registered. Are people authenticating to it? Are they not? How are they authenticating to it? You have to kind of look in multiple levels on disk, in config or flags, and then in the API to understand what's going on, which doesn't seem great.
Yeah, I'm not saying that there's not space for improvement. I guess I would be saying, if we're going to do this for one kind of webhook, wouldn't we expect to do it for all kinds of webhooks?
Yes, I agree with that. One of the things we're looking at is we've copied and pasted our webhook all the things approach in a lot of different places, and I would want to keep those coherent.
The other thing is that I also see a need to be able to provide tokens or client certs that for webhooks that are not cluster aware, right? Because the whole point of me having a webhook is that I can choose whether I'm going to run it as something cluster aware or plug into some other system.
Yeah, I agree with that. It was much more difficult to, I guess I'd have to look and see how you guys are doing that in the admission webhooks. And you're able to share that secret, I guess, across the aggregates by just host mounting it on the master node? Is that how you're doing it?
It's not prescriptive for how you actually do it. Simplest case is to create 4 different secrets and mount them. But I think I need both. I think having something cluster aware that does this, that can wire it up automatically with restricted audiences is really useful. I also need the ability to just say, like, this is the one when you talk to this webhook, use this token because my IT department made it.
Right. Totally agree. Okay, so do we think this has value then, at least providing a mechanism easily turned on, cluster aware? Or would we prefer to just go towards something that could handle non-cluster aware webhooks?
I think that the design needs to tolerate. I want to be able to see something overall that can functionally do both.
Okay. Okay. Let me think.
I guess even if it were like, and you either do this or you do that, it's just that we already have webhooks today. They're already handling some of these cases. I want to be sure when you add the next one that we don't just end up with the 11th standard, right?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Let me dig into that implementation a bit, and I'll update the cap and kind of look at where it might make sense to squeeze that in there. So.
Thanks. Just one thing I wanted to add also is if we do stick with the token request and token review approach, or kind of fit that into the existing story, I'd like to see a discussion of audiences, which audiences would be used and how they would be determined.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yep.
Great. Any other comments on this before we move on to 114? All right. Thanks, Patrick. All right. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce this username.
Yeah, my name's Mike. My username is pronounced.
Thanks, Mike.
I'll
Please
take
go ahead.
pronunciation you can scrub out. Basically, I'm going to be really quick because I want you guys to have as much time to discuss what you're actually going to work on in 114 as possible. So my name is Mike. I'm on the release team. I'm the release lead shadow. Aaron Krickenberger is the release lead. Most of you are probably familiar with Aaron. Basically, there are two things that we're doing different this release, and between the release lead group and the release enhancements lead group, we're kind of talking to as many SIGs as possible, making sure that everyone understands the timeline and the implications of some of the changes. So basically, the first thing that we're doing differently in 114 is that there's no code slush. Code slush historically has been 1 week before code freeze. Nobody really used it for anything other than like a 2-minute warning that code freeze is coming. So so if you were relying on that, keep that in mind. And then the other more significant thing that's changing for 114 is that all proposed enhancements must have a KEP. And we can talk more, and we can talk more about what a KEP is, or what an enhancement is, what enhancements require a KEP, and what have you, what should be in a KEP, and what have you, if any of you aren't familiar. Happy to talk about that offline. But basically, the release schedule for 114 has the enhancements freeze on January 29th, which is 6 days from now. And basically the enhancements freeze is saying that if you're going to work on enhancements in 114 and ship them to some degree, that enhancement must have a KEP that's submitted, reviewed, landed, and tracked in the 114 milestone by Tuesday. So it's possible for a lot of old enhancements that don't have KEPs yet. Really the most important thing about the KEP that needs to be articulated is the graduation criteria and testing of the feature, just so, this is kind of supporting a larger effort to centralize how certain enhancements are tracked, removes our reliance on like spreadsheets and other kind of manual tools, so that we can centralize graduation criteria, testing information, links to dashboards and stuff like that in the KEPs themselves. So TLDR, make sure that your KEPs are in by Tuesday. If you need help with this, if you're like, wow, I have a bunch of enhancements that I'm working on that are just about to go GA, or they're just about to go beta and I've never written a KEP for them or something, feel free to hit up me, Marpaya in SIG release, or Ben the Elder, who's the other release lead shadow, or Claire Lawrence, who's the enhancements lead for 114. And she has a set of shadows that she's working with as well. So any of us can help you put together the enhancements, or the KEPs rather, if you're strapped for time, but just let us know so that you don't get caught up in an unfortunate situation where you're after the enhancements freeze.
And to be clear, I think I was hearing that in terms of the KEP lifecycle, reviewed, merged, and implementable. Is that correct?
I believe so, yeah. I mean, I believe that the KEP needs to be merged by the enhancements freeze, but if I'm being honest, I'm not 100% sure on that, so I'd have to get back to you. It either needs to be put up in a PR or merged and implementable.
The guidance around the KEP process has been merge early, even before it is completely ready to implement. And so merged, it doesn't mean a lot if it's still in the provisional state.
Sure. And I mean, as long as it's merged and, as long as it's being tracked in the 114 milestone by Tuesday, I think that's generally the most important factor, because you can continue to work on articulating what the enhancement is in the KEP and stuff throughout the release as that becomes more clear during implementation. But really, we just want to make sure that you have the graduation criteria and your dashboard set up. You know how you're going to test this thing, and you know what like the decisions you're going to make when it comes time to like flip a switch or ship this for 114 or not. And your understanding of the enhancement itself could change over the release, but as long as your graduation criteria is consistent, that's what the release team is really worried about.
And if I understand correctly, there are checklists and things that should be considered either in the KEP template, or there are polls open to update that. So as people are kind of updating old docs or trying to make these criteria available, is there a place they can go look to get the list of things they should consider and provide?
Yeah, well, there was a PR open last night that Stephen and Aaron were working through for updating the KEP template in K enhancements. So hopefully that has landed. But yeah, when you go to submit an issue to K enhancements, I believe the issue template is the KEP template, and that will have all of the sections of, it will have more than, it will have a lot of sections in it, but including graduation criteria and test plan. Cool. So are there any other questions about KEPs, KEP freeze, or anything like that? Awesome. Well, that's it for me. Thank you guys for your time. Really appreciate it. And like I said, feel free to hit me up on Slack if you have any questions or need any help about
All right. Thank you very much, Mike. So this is a good transition into discussing our SIG Auth 114 plans and priorities. And as we go through this list, I think it would be a good idea to mention what the current status of these are, and whether there is a KEP that is up to date with the current plans. So Jordan, do you want to talk about the first on here?
Yeah. So part of what I'm trying to do this year is help push things that have kind of languished in beta towards V1 or GA. And so CSR got to the point where we needed it to be and then stopped. And so this issue had some shortcomings and things described. And so for 114, my goal is to start putting together the plan to address some of these and figure out what is required for V1. I don't anticipate work merging necessarily for 114, but more sketching out the path to V1 for this. So I will not be rushing to put together a KEP by a week from today for this.
Sounds good. Thanks. All right. Looks like you're on the second one too.
Yeah. Client and serving cert rotation. Right now, the kubelet is the consumer of that. Client rotation has been exercised quite a bit, and so I think we should look to graduate this. There is not a KEP outlining test and documentation, but I will be working on that. For serving cert, that has been available, but not as well tested. And so I think the first step is outlining how has it been used, how has it been tested, are we happy with the level of the feature? Right now, the feature is limited to the kubelet. All approval has to be done out of band. You have to decide whether to approve these requests based on your knowledge of what host names that kubelet should have access to. And we don't have anything in the project today that gives us that information in a consistent way across environments. So this is an optional feature that you can turn on if you want. So I will be sketching out a KEP describing where it's currently tested. It's currently tested in alpha CI jobs, but we would like to enable that being tested in beta jobs as well. And then maybe graduated or not this release, but at least have a plan for getting testing and documentation up to speed.
All right, thanks. So the next one on the list is webhook auth, which we already discussed earlier. And I guess the takeaway here is that we better move fast on figuring out what the plan is if we want that to get into 114. Anything else to add there, Patrick? Jordan?
Yeah, I'll get to rewriting that in the next day or two. Get the changes up, and we'll see if we can squeeze it in yet. So,
all right, thanks. All right, so the next one on the list is to address some of the post-mortem action items from the proxy server issue. It looks like this link goes to just a single one to investigate defaulting anonymous discovery requests to disallowed. Is this something that would need a KEP, do you think?
Probably.
Yeah, there are a lot of kind of corner cases and nuances in what this ends up materializing as, and how we would deal with those upgrades and rollouts and options and everything. So, Jake, are you on the call? Take that as a no, but I work with Jake, so I can follow up with him offline. All right, Mo, do you want to take the next item?
Sure. Did you want to open the link?
Sorry?
Did you want to open the link?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
So as part of the follow-up work from the token request API, one of the things that we can start working towards is making the service accounts that are used by controllers to start sort of optionally using that API if it's available. I think that there is still some conversation to be had on how we make it so that the generated secrets by the token controller aren't being set out for these clients, because the goal would be that these clients only have their ephemeral secrets, and sort of memory there isn't a secret sitting around for you to read off of etcd or off the API. So there is not a KEP for this. I don't necessarily know what the level of interest is in trying to do this in 1.14, or if we would want to maybe propose some ideas on just how we want to make the token controller not generate the secrets and start writing out code and push it off to a later date to get it merged. Folks have any feelings one way or the other? Take that as a no. So I can see if I get a chance, I can try to write a KEP, and if it doesn't work out, that's fine. I don't think it's necessarily a big rush. I think we have a lot of various things we want to do with token requests in the next few releases. Anyway.
Thanks. Can folks still see my screen?
Nope, it's black.
Yeah, okay. Zoom decided to stop working for me on that. Sorry about that. Mo or Jordan, can one of you present the agenda, please? I thought I had fixed this problem. So the last item we have on the list here is the run as group feature. I think this probably belongs under the umbrella of SIG node. But Kare Mayank, is there specific issues you wanted us to look at from the SIG Auth side?
I had actually gotten copied into the poll that was attempting to promote this. I think this is a good example of what we're looking for in sort of KEPs that are standardizing features already in progress. Like just making it really clear what is tested, how is it tested, how do we know this, what is the current support for it. And so this has been in progress for a while. There are tests, but just pulling that together, making sure we have coverage and that we're confident in the feature before we promote it. So I don't know of any blockers, but I think the enumerating that checklist that Mike talked about will flush out if there are any things to unsure of.
Yeah. So yeah, take a look at that for a good example. Mike, do you want to talk about JOT signing?
Yeah. So I opened a PEP and a PR implementation for training for AWTs for Token Request API. I could demo it next time. I don't have it totally ready right now, but basically it's external signing of AWTs over a gRPC API. The initial PEP I opened for delivering keys over the API, that we went back, reworked it, and external signing really wasn't that much more difficult, so just went with that instead. I'd love to get that in for 114 if there's appetite for that. Here's there. Happy taking any comments, considerations, or anything. Does anyone have any comment about that specifically?
I kind of wondered, just in general, what if there were standard ways to obtain things like serving certs or keys or signing keys, rather than inventing our own sort of API. If there were more standard ways to consume that, either from pipes or from like process redirection, or if there were some of those process managers have, I don't know about standard ways, but have ways that we could learn from in how they provide secret material to processes. I don't know if you'd done any survey of what was already out there.
No, I hadn't looked because I was really just focusing for this on JW signing rather than like certificate reading. Because I was thinking, yeah, for the original implementation, it could have been, you maybe could just read over a pipe for like a certificate, but really wanted, the objective for what I really wanted was to be able to support like rotating the key out for the API server without having a full API server restart. So I hadn't really looked into like other standards for doing that, but yeah.
So I had a question on this. If the desire is to make it so that the Kube API server doesn't have to restart, and I've only scanned the KEP, so I think the proposal was a like a socket-based API, correct? A Unix socket.
Yep.
Is there some reason we wouldn't simply do the approach that like kubectl and them have about, or I guess not kubectl, but like, can we not make it just cache the token and then keep rereading it and keep updating the cache every so often? Like I can see benefit of not having the secret on disk. I do realize that with the Unix domain socket, but is it worth it to build an entire like pseudo API for how you transfer this data to the Kube API server for what is effectively, please don't restart me, please just keep reading this off of disk?
Yeah, I mean, it is for please don't restart me, but it also is for like offloading signing out of the API server. So I guess, yeah, I'm open to that too, but I don't know how, like, even, yeah, if you're just caching, then you're in rereading, then you're not supporting the offloading story. So
correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a long time since I read this code. The signing only occurs in the token controller, right? Because the API server just needs to validate, right? It doesn't mint them.
Not with token requests.
That's true. That's true. Token request. It's the other way. change that. Yeah, I just had general concerns about adding a brand new API. I understand it's like similar to KMS and it's not necessarily a large footprint, but it is, as Drew mentioned, another thing we made up.
Would this make more sense as an alpha API rather than a P1 beta 1 API for a release just so that it's a third alpha feature?
I think the level of the API, I don't have strong opinions about it starting out as a feature that we could drop if it didn't pan out. I think I care more about.
Yeah.
So feature gated, clearly alpha, not allowed by default on supported clusters that you would just stumble into this and not realize that you're using something that is still experimental.
Right.
I think when we worked through some of the KMS stuff, we wanted to have a pretty good understanding of the field, like who would be plugging into this, and have some level of confidence that this was not an extension point with like one consumer. So it would probably be good to solicit feedback on this from people who be potential users. Say, what would you use this for? Does this meet a need? Are there other ways you could meet that need? Yeah, getting some feedback on that would be helpful. Beyond that, I didn't have a lot of time to read over it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right, we're at time, but there's just one more item on the list. Micah, do you want to give a quick summary?
Yeah, it's just so for token request, projected token volumes using the token request API has a hard-coded 80% lifetime renewal or 24 hours, which and I just wanted to see if there was appetite for anything at a configurable rotation period could be 50% rather than 80%.
I think the point about percentage breaks down with very short lifetimes is good. I would probably tend towards just changing how Kubelet computes it to say 80% or within 5 minutes or something as a start before we start exposing it as a configuration, just to see if that would accomplish what we needed.
Okay. Sure.
All right, let's call that a wrap. Thanks, everyone. See you in 2 weeks.